The Old Man and the Aquatic Monster. This is what I have heard from my mom, and my mom had heard from my grandma. My mom told me that my grandma was a good storyteller. Her stories had made her a great childhood. My mom has an older brother, Uncle William, and a younger brother, Uncle Jack. When they were children, every night, under the dim oil lamp, they always gathered around her so that she would tell her 3 kid stories while she was mending their clothes. Today, I'm gonna tell you a story about a monster. My grandma had started the story like that. Monster? Where does it live? How does it look like? Does it eat human beings? Every time my grandma started to narrate, her kids bombarded her with that kind of question. Those little kids were overexcited and curious about what could happen in a thrilling story. Stay tuned. If you guys keep interrupting like that, I'm not able to continue. My grandma always tried to calm down her children. If you guys don't stay put, I am going to stop the story here. She pretended to be unhappy so that her kids could stay put and stop to ask. They wanted to hear the story. And then she started the story with her light, steady voice in front of the dim oil lamp. She was mending clothes while telling her story. The story was about Smith's family in a small village. Smith's family lived in a small village. Mr. Smith lived with his son and his daughter-in-law. His family had got a curse for 3 generations. They had only a child. What is a curse? Uncle William stopped my grandma there. He was a little child then and unable to understand what a curse is. A curse is magic that intended to bring bad luck to people. In this case, Smith's family had been cursed for having only a son for 3 generations. My grandma had stopped and explained. After explaining, she threatened her kids, "If you dare to interrupt me another time, I'll put a curse on you." All of them were scared out, so they tried to keep silent and listen to her story. Smith's daughter-in-law had been pregnant. Everyone hoped that would be a beautiful cutie son to perpetuate their family lineage. But then, that was the most disappointing moment for their family, because the day the child was born, everything was not like they had expected. That particular day, while Mr. Smith had been smoking at the front yard, his wife came to him and announced that their daughter-in-law had given birth to a little girl. Mr. Smith had put the cigarette down and given a light sign. "Common, let's come in to welcome our little granddaughter to her life. I know you are unhappy, but you have to take a look at your granddaughter, don't you? Don't let our kids down." Mrs. Smith reminded him. Once Mr. Smith entered the room, his daughter-in-law was resting in the bed. His son, Lucas, was overexcited, happiness visible on his face. He was holding his first baby. "Dad, look at my little daughter. She is your granddaughter." Lucas quickly brought the baby in front of his father. He was on cloud 9. At the moment Mr. Smith saw his little granddaughter, all of his sorrow had been likely to go away. He gave a big smile. She was such a cutie little granddaughter to Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith reached his hand to hold his granddaughter. Mrs. Smith and Lucas were all really a relief and very emotional with that. They knew he always had expected a grandson, but that did not matter anymore. The whole family had welcomed an angel full of joy. Time flew. The little granddaughter had been grown up. She learned how to walk and could say her first words. Her name is Emma. She loved his grandpa the most. She followed him everywhere and called him aloud, "Grandpa, Grandpa." "Are you hanging out with your granddaughter?" That was Oliver, his neighbor. He was taking his grandson for a walk. "Oh, little Emma, such an adorable girl. Notwithstanding, your grandpa used to always ask your parent gave him a grandson. He didn't like a granddaughter." Mr. Smith didn't want to hear those words. That was as if people were cursing that his family would have no son to perpetuate their family lineage. Later on, his daughter-in-law could give him another grandson. Even though he didn't like that, the old smith pretended to smile and then took Emma to another place. He usually took his granddaughter to the river for fishing. His neighbors usually teased him, "Mr. Smith, are you going to go fishing with your granddaughter?" People said that he didn't want a granddaughter, so he was so embarrassed when having her. He didn't want to talk to anyone, so he took Emma to the river to avoid his neighbors. But those all were a rumor. At that moment, he loved and treasured his little granddaughter. But those gossips had continued every day. "If I were you, I would take your granddaughter to the middle of nowhere, and choked her to death, then demand your son to give me a grandson." No way he could have a son. Many people had joked about Smith's family curse. Those trash talks weren't fun. One day, the old smith and his granddaughter went to the river as usual, but they weren't back yet when it was getting dark. His wife and son got butterflies in their stomachs, which was out of the ordinary, so they headed to the river to look for them. Once reaching the riverbank, they saw a mess there. The fishing pole and their pot were lying on the ground, disorderly. There were a few dead fishes there, but Smith and his granddaughter were nowhere to be found. His wife and son sensed something unsecured. They called the old man and the little girl aloud, "Dad! Emma!" Their calls echoed around the river. After a few moments, they saw the old man came out of the water. "What are you going?" Mrs. Smith wondered. Lucas came close to him and asked worriedly, "Daddy, where is Emma?" But there was just silence replied them. Mr. Smith held a deep breath then dived back to the river. "Quick, come and pull your father back here." Mrs. Smith didn't feel right. The son took off his shirt quickly and jumped out to the river. He swam to Mr. Smith. "Daddy, where is Emma? What happened?" The old smith was terrifying. He tended to dive down one again, but his son had asked. He hardly kept his breath and answered, "Emma. She is under the water. I have to find her. Let me find her." "What, Dad? Why is Emma under the river? How did this happen?" Lucas had panicked. He thought that his daughter had fell to the river, but the old smith assured, "That was a monster, it dragged our Emma to the water." Lucas thought that his father had been too panicked to have a clear mind at that moment. He talked nonsense. The son asked for young men in the village to find his daughter all night. If she had died, they would find her body, but they had found nothing after the whole night of looking. "Dad, what happened? Please tell me the whole things. Please told us what happened with you and our granddaughter?" Lucas and Mrs. Smith were unable to keep calm. They headed home and asked the old man sitting powerlessly in his bed. Mr. Smith had started to tell them what happened at the river that day. There was an aquatic monster appeared. As usual, the two granddaughter had come to the river. They hoped they could fish big fishes that day. Being at that age, the old man had been uncomfortable with his knees when sitting a long time, so he stood up to make his legs better. Mr. Smith walked around and reminded his granddaughter to stay put and wait for him to come back. Emma was an obedient kid. She had not moved. Sometimes, she touched the fishes in the pot. The old man was right behind her, stretching his muscles. Suddenly, he felt a cold breeze from the river. He sensed something came out of the river. He turned back, saw a giant creature coming out of the water, made a strong current under the river, came close to Emma, opened its mouth, and swallowed his dear granddaughter in a blink of an eye. The old man rushed back to save his granddaughter. Still, he was late. The aquatic monster was too fast. In a few seconds, it had swallowed his granddaughter completely and dived down to the river. The old man screamed aloud and called his granddaughter name, "Emma, where are you?" Without hesitations, he swiftly jumped to the river to find his granddaughter. His head turned blank, he got panicked, and he repeatedly called Emma. The old smith kept diving and coming out to take his breath for hours. But he was unable to find his granddaughter as well as the aquatic monster until his son and his wife came. The old smith tore out. He was suffering from losing his granddaughter in front of his eyes. "I'm a useless piece of shit. I lost her." Everyone had been tearing up as well after hearing what happened. Still, Lucas and Mrs. Smith couldn't believe there would be an aquatic monster that could swallow Emma. Since then, Mr. Smith was likely to be withered. He stayed up multiple nights. His hair and beard had turned gray after a few days. Every day, he sat at his doorstep and smoked alone. He had not spoken a word to anyone. His accident had been spreading around the village, and a nasty rumor had been started. They said the old smith had killed his own granddaughter. He didn't like a girl to be his granddaughter, and all he told just a lie to cover his sin. That rumor had reached the old man. One day, people saw him. After days of being at home, he came out to the market and bought lots of ropes and iron stakes. Once he backed home, he kept his silence and locked him up in the storage. The family was curious about that. Disregards, his wife had convinced him to open the door, but he did not answer a word. There were just rattle from the storage every day. Mrs. Smith brought him meals every day, but he just had a little, then got back to the storage. His wife was so afraid of him, she cried her eyes out at the door. "Please, come out. Our Emma had gone for a while. Everything had been over. We gotta move on." On the fourth day of being in the storage, he opened the door and stepped out. There were a bunch of ropes on his shoulder. He held a big, sharp iron hook, looked terrified. He was saying no words, came to the pig pen. Mrs. Smith followed him. "Dear, what are you going?" He was so determined. "I'll kill that aquatic monster. How dare it swallowed my dear granddaughter. Are you insane?" Hearing he talked nonsense, his wife thought he was out of his mind, but she was unable to stop him. He dropped the rope on the ground and come into the pig pen with the iron hook. "That's right. I'm crazy. I gotta take revenge for Emma." He gritted his teeth and used the hook to tab one of the pig's neck. The pig screamed out. His reaction made his wife falling down to the ground. Frozen, she looked at his pale shadow. Everyone who saw him would be scared to death on the street. Looked like he wanted to kill someone. He carried the rope on his shoulder. On top of that, there was an iron hook on his hand. It was hooking to the pig's head, which was bleeding under his feet. The news spread around the village shortly. Everyone got excited and curious. They all came to the river to see. Mr. Smith nailed a giant wooden pole in the river bank. He wrapped the rope around it, set the knot, and tightened it. At the other end of the rope, he hung the iron hook with the pig's head in. He threw it down to the river. It turned out he used that pig's head as a monster lure. Everyone in the river bank had gossiped about that. One said that Mr. Smith might be crazy. Another said he had talked the truth. Emma had been eaten by the aquatic monster. Once he threw the pig's head to the river, he quietly sat in the riverbank. His back was on the pole and wait for the aquatic monster to come, but after a long while, there was nothing happened. He is really out of his mind. What monster? This is bullshit. Yeah, I agreed. He just made this up. It was nearly a day passed by, but nothing happened. People had been waiting with him from the daylight to dawn, then they all left. There was only Smith left there at the river bank. He patiently sits in silence. His eyes gazed at the water. His face was getting withered. For days, he didn't drink water. His eye sockets were deepened. His lip got cracked. He pursed his lip and wait. He was getting weak. His eyelids became heavier, then he passed out. Being drowsy, he heard his little granddaughter's voice, "Grandpa, Grandpa." "Wow, Grandpa, we got a fish already." That was her familiar voice every time they went fishing, and that made him awake. Mr. Smith Jolt awoke. He saw the rope was tightened. He thought that the monster had fallen to the bait. The rope was pulled by the monster under the water. That must have been a mighty monster. He could sense the giant aquatic monster down there. It was trapped in his hook, and the monster tried to escape the hook. The rope had been pulled violently by the monster. The old man tried to hold it tightly in despair. The aquatic monster was more potent than him. The rope had been pulled violently to the water. The old man tried to hold the rope tightly so that he was dragging and scratched. His palms got bleeding, but he kept having the string. The old smith buried his feet in the ground so that the monster was unable to make him move an inch. He used all of his strength. He was so determined to revenge the enemy which had to swallow his granddaughter. He gritted his teeth tightly. He told himself that he would never let that monster go. But as a human being, he was nearly dragged into the river multiple times, but he kept forcing. He turned his body and squeezed the rope on his shoulder. He tried to pull the cord towards the pole. He got multiple whips on his back. His body was bleeding. He knew that he could not fight the monster any longer like that, so he tried his best to tie the rope to the pole. He tried to tie the rope some more around the pole. Then he leaned his whole body to the pole so that the monster didn't pull him away. The pole had been buried deep in the ground, so the monster could not escape from that. It thrashed around. The monster had stuck in the hook as well, been unable to escape or swim away. It made some big weird sounds. The following day, people came to his spot to check out. They saw the old man was leaning on the pole. "Look, the old smith is still there. Come there." Once they came closer to him, they had been astounded. The old man had been so exhausted, but he still tried to hold the rope on his shoulder. Scratches and dried blood were all over his body. There was likely a heavy fish in the other end of the rope. One of them had pulled the rope and sensed a heavy thing. Then they called for some more strong guys to help him to pull the rope. They were all feeling the heavy weight. "What is this heavy?" People together had pulled it out of the water. It turned out just a giant catfish. "Holy shit. How come the big catfish exist? It must be a monster." "That's it. Looks at the mouth. It could swallow a human being." People were amazed about the catfish. No one had seen a big one like that ever. The villagers had ripped open its belly to see what the catfish could eat. In the belly, there were lots of bones from human beings and animals. They had no idea if Emma's bones were among that stuff. But being eye-witnessed, Mr. Smith had caught that monster. Everyone had believed what he told earlier, that catfish obviously capable of eating his granddaughter. Alright, this is the end of our story today. Whenever my mom remembered those stories from my grandma, they were very much alive and attractive. There were always good and bad people in her stories. There was always a discussion of my grandma's kids afterward. The old smith was miserable. No one believed him in the first place. Kids always remembered carefully and believed those thrilling stories. Do you think people or monster is the scarier? After finished every story, my grandma always asked them a question. I think that was how my grandma educated them. Uncle William promptly responded, "The monster is scarier. It could eat human beings in a blink of an eye. Human being is strong as well. The human being could beat and kill the monster as Mom's story," my mom added. "Nah, I think the hatred and rumors are more horrible." Uncle Jack had an outstanding thought. He thought rumors are the most horrible things. It could kill people. And then, a loud discussion had started among them. They all wanted to protect their points. My grandma always smiled at them. Bedtime. She didn't indicate who was right and who was wrong. But even it was bedtime, her kids didn't stop the discussion about the story, the monster, the old man, and the gossips from the villagers. My grandma always ended up a story by yelling at her kids, "Stop. Close your eyes and go to sleep. Stop talking, or else you will get spanking.